Duna is the fourth planet in orbit of Kerbal and the fourth largest planet. It is easily identified by its red color and greatly resembles Mars in our own solar system. Duna has a single, tidally locked natural satellite named Ike. Duna is most players' first interplanetary mission due to its proximity to Kerbin, low gravity, and thin atmosphere. The atmosphere is present enough to allow aerobraking and the use of parachutes, however is thin enough to allow easy ascent from the surface. Parachutes, while usable, are significantly less effective than they would be at Kerbin, as the atmosphere at Duna is about 1/15th as dense as Kerbin's. Due to the very weak gravity, ladders are also optional on most craft. Kerbals can reach great heights by jumping and using their RCS packs. So how do you know if your craft is capable of the round trip to Duna? I use the in-game Delta V calculations in conjunction with the Delta V map obtained off the internet. Delta V calculations are part of KSP as of 1.6, however have always been available thanks to mods such as Kerbal Engineer. The use of Delta V maps could be an extensive lesson on its own. Skipping the lesson of reading a Delta V map, I know that with around 7,500 meters per second Delta V, I can make the round trip to the surface of Duna and back home. I identify if my craft has enough Delta V by utilizing the UI within the vehicle assembly building. Remember to adjust the calculator for atmospheric differences and consider where each stage will actually be used when calculating. Aligning the planets is imperative to your mission's success. If done right, it can greatly increase trip efficiency. The planets need to be in specific positions relative to each other to allow interplanetary transfers to be possible. When traveling from Kerbin to Duna, Duna should be about 45 degrees ahead of Kerbin. When traveling home, Duna should be about 75 degrees ahead of Kerbin. A great resource for all interplanetary calculations is the interactive illustrated interplanetary guide and calculator for KSP seen here. Before creating the craft, I'd like to demonstrate where my research nodes typically are when landing on Duna becomes trivial. Skipper engines featured on the 5th tier, heavy rocketry, alongside Poodle engines will power the craft. 5th tier, fuel systems provides 3 types of fuel tanks we will use, as well as fuel lines. 5th tier, landing, provides landing struts, as well as the 2.5 meter heat shield for re-entry. 5th tier, electrics, allows the use of solar panels, which will recharge batteries, which is an absolute necessity. Finally, at Tier 6, we will use 2 items from the Command Modules node, the 2.5 meter service bay and the Mark III command pod. Okay, onward to the vehicle assembly building for the construction of a Duna-worthy spacecraft. Here's the craft I will demonstrate how to build that is capable of the round trip. Take note that the 9,000 meters per second Delta V listed in the bottom right corner. We will start with a Mark III command pod and adorn it with the first of many parachutes. Underneath, I place the 2.5 meter service bay and fill it with science devices and batteries. This is the re-entry pod, and I protect it with a 2.5 meter heat shield. Next is a decoupler. Short Rocco Max fuel tank and a Poodle engine. Side-mounted decouplers with tall FL-T800 fuel tanks will be affixed with the landing legs, and I eventually decide to have a tripod-style lander. Connect the outside tanks to the central tanks via fuel lines and then rearrange the staging. I had solar panels at this point, so I do not forget. I calculate a delta V for this craft as if it were on Duna, and it is far more than the 2,000 or so we would need to return home. I cover the ship with a plethora of parachutes, as they are relatively ineffective at Duna, however greatly helpful. It doesn't hurt to take your lander onto the launch pad for a test, as sometimes you may notice glaring flaws in design, theory, or application. Back to the build. Now we have our lander, it's time to plan how we'll get to the surface of Duna. And my favorite high-powered delivery device has always been asparagus staging. I use skipper engines underneath 2 medium Rockomax fuel tanks and connect them with struts for integrity and meticulously place fuel lines in a specific pattern. I will give the pattern purpose through careful planning of craft staging. Simply put, you may want to research asparagus staging if you do not know how to do this in Kerbal Space Program. I check delta V for values at sea level, Kerbin, knowing that I need at least 3,400 to obtain orbit alongside a positive thrust to weight ratio. Anything greater than 1.0 will fly, however, ideally you want 1.3 or higher TWR. After the first 3,400 delta V has been spent from our craft, we can calculate the remaining fuel as if in vacuum. And this indicates we not only have enough fuel, delta V, but a bit of excess that will allow us to compensate for mistakes, poor piloting, or improper planetary alignment. A final note before launch. I would use large nose cones if I had them to reduce drag, but I haven't unlocked them from the tech tree yet, purposely to keep it simple and to prove that they are not necessary. It is time for launch. Before I leave the ground, I like to make sure the planets are aligned properly one final time. You can see here I allow Kerbin to catch up to Duna, making a near 45-degree angle between the two. Engines to full throttle, SAS on. Double check staging and make sure we have a pilot and an engineer. We're taking Catcuss along for the valuable experience. 3, 2, 1, launch. Our next target is a stable orbit. Anywhere from 80 kilometers to 125 kilometers is fine. Once in orbit, I scroll way out on the galaxy map and set Duna as my target. Now I can set a maneuver node and plan my transfer burn. Maneuver nodes can be dragged around, so you can try and find a position that is inducive to a Dunian encounter. This process takes patience, luck, and a bit of knowledge, but before long you'll see that from Kerbin orbit we can have an encounter ready to go. I had to increase the number of displayed conics because the moon was in my way. This is an option in the settings, and is why my orbital trajectory is displayed in red here. Once any encounter with Duna is projected, I leave Kerbin's sphere of influence, but as soon as I enter the galactic orbit around Kerbal, I plan my next maneuver node. Plan early to keep things efficient. This node is enough to place me right on the doorstep of Duna, just a few delta V shy of becoming captured within the atmosphere and landing. As you see here, targeting Duna and then adjusting the node allows you to be really accurate with your planning. Planning the burn as early as possible, you'll yield the most efficient use of your craft's delta V. With our planned trajectory on Duna's doorstep, we can warp to the very beginning of the sphere of influence, where I make my next maneuver node. I'm only creating a maneuver node so my brain can comprehend which direction I'll need to burn in order to lower my periapsis over Duna. Once I get my bearings straight, I'll delete the node and just lightly burn in that direction to lower my periapsis to a suitable aerobraking or landing trajectory. Approximately 10 kilometers is ideal here, as Duna's mountains can reach over 8 kilometers, but you'll really want to be low enough to effectively use the atmosphere. Also, and very importantly, I stage my parachutes now in a way that is conducive to the landing. I also adjust settings that allow them to open higher in the air than default, as I'm patient and don't mind a slower landing process if it increases success chance. Once my planned trajectory is skimming through the atmosphere of Duna, I stage my craft so only the lander remains, and I take in the scenic descent. With a periapsis of 11 kilometers here, it is more than enough to slow my craft down to a landing speed with a single pass. I open drogue chutes first, as soon as they won't be torn to shreds, which is followed shortly by 7 normal chutes. Also, I found this type of landing gear to be too bouncy when extended, so you'll see me attempting to land on retracted landing gear in a personal experiment of bounce testing. Even with 9 parachutes, we're still falling too fast for safety, and will slowly burn retrograde in an attempt for a gentle landing. A little wobbly, but we landed in one piece in the right orientation. Congratulations, you've just landed on the surface of Duna with plenty of fuel to spare. Now is the time to conduct experiments, pose for sweet screenshots, and enjoy playing in the unique conditions that exist on Duna. The return trip is as simple as lining up the planetary phase angle. You want Duna to be 75 degrees ahead of Kerbin, so I warp time until I'm satisfied that I'm close enough to that point. I will launch at 90 degrees counterclockwise and aim for an apoapsis of 70 kilometers, as without research I'm positive that is outside the atmospheric influence of Duna. I then circularize this orbit and make my final large interplanetary burn. Set Kerbin as the target and create a node that will launch you behind Duna, drawing your orbit inwards. With patience and luck, we'll obtain an encounter. However, in this example, I struggle a bit. I settle for close enough, but actually end up fixing my trajectory about a third of the way home for best results in my particular trip. I also ditched the empty fuel tanks that functioned as my lander's legs. Just like before, once I've obtained an encounter, I make another node that will clean up the encounter, with my target selected so I can see the results of my planned burn. If we plan and execute this burn well enough, it could be our last. I get close and stable and burn radially inward to set up the final aerobraking and landing of our capsule. Thank you so much for taking the time to follow my journey. I hope this helps you discover your own.